if we're putting, repetitions into doing the job, we should be infusing that mental health piece as well. People have to believe that you are there for them and that you're not the narc. 95% of the time, I think that the professional, when they say, I'm fine, I'm good, they really do mean it. It's important that everyone has self-awareness and insight. And so I think the way to help people heal is to be able to have genuine, authentic connections with other people. It's going to be a little akin to the types of things we do at the retreat, in that we're going to have conversations and facilitated discussions and workshops in every room that people can choose which one they want to go to.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Dr. Tracy Hejmanowski. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and the founder of First Responder Project, who consults with several Florida sheriff's offices and Air Force Ready Firefighter program. Tracy will break down the concepts of stress inoculation, the path of least resistance, exposure catalog, and reveal why she's committed to offering retreats to first responders to regain the momentum needed and to remain operationally ready and emotionally present for their families. We'd like to invite you to like and subscribe: YouTube, Responder Resilience; Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., and Responder TV. We're on LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. We'll be right back to speak with Tracy after this.
In this family, more of us die by our own hands than by the hazards of the job.
In this family, up to a quarter of 911 telecommunicators have symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
In this family, our mental health and wellness are in crisis,
while responders are quietly suffering.
In this family, many struggle with job-related stress,
burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, substance abuse,
and relationship problems.
In this family, we can help the helpers.
with vital information and resources,
resilience strategies,
and success stories of overcoming the obstacles.
In this family, no one is alone.
Welcome to Respond to Resilience with co-hosts retired Lieutenant David Dashinger, Dr. Stacy Raymond, and Bonnie Wimley, LCSW EMTB.
We'd like to welcome Tracy Hejmanowski. She's a licensed clinical psychologist with 24 years of experience focused on occupational stress and trauma among first responders and military communities. She founded First Responder Project. It's a nonprofit that provides summits, peer trainings, and recalibration events for first responders and their loved ones. Dr. Hejmanowski has worked with repatriated POWs, special warfare operations, law enforcement, fire rescue, and their families. And she served as an active duty and contracted Navy psychologist for 19 years and has run retreats for 13 years. In addition to her clinical practice, she provides advanced training for peer support teams, consults with several sheriff's offices and Air Force Ready Firefighter program, and speaks nationally and authors regularly. She's an IAFF-trained Red and Blue Line rescue provider and is a designated national FOP vetted provider. Tracy, a warm welcome to Respond to Resilience.
Thanks so much, David and Stacy. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So, Tracy, I'm going to start out by asking you just to tell us a little bit about your Navy career and how that influenced your work with first responders, specifically mental health.
Certainly. I joined as a direct accession into the Navy shortly before 9/11 and had been associated with the military because my husband was active duty. So I was moving around in mental health spaces and was volunteering at an overseas base and was able to take a commission while overseas. And despite 9/11 happening and orders being canceled, was fortunate enough to get back to my home of record at the time over there. So I very quickly dove into the operational post-deployment side of mental health. For the majority of my career, I've only worked with those who have experienced either a deployment, a combat deployment, a ship deployment, and particularly anything related to trauma. So if there was an accident, an injury, a death, or certainly any ongoing, traumatic stressors, they would come to me at the Deployment Health Center, and we would. It really set me up to realize that this was an entire different population of individuals. I think I've been very lucky and fortunate, and to be able to work with a group of individuals who never really wanted to come and see me. They were never forced to come and see me. But when they got into the therapy room, they really were willing to do some really difficult work. And as a therapist who naturally would have to go to therapy here and there, or doesn't want to go to therapy, I can completely identify with people who are, stoic, and the part of their, their life, life's work is being resilient. But it shows you that you can be resilient and strong and need to decompress and need to recalibrate and need to therapy, whether it be a therapy or a therapeutic. So the military, there certainly are some similarities and some differences shifting over to the civilian population of first responders, but that's really what led me to pivot and to be curious intellectually and experientially about what's going on in the civilian world. What are the similarities and differences? So started doing ride-alongs, and just for my own edification, started riding along and seeing, learning very quickly what I didn't know. But steep learning curves are fun to me from an intellectual standpoint. So it was a very, very good education, and so much on the job training. Grad school was phenomenal for setting, a foundation in behavioral health, but there's nothing like being out there and, being in it and just being absorbed in it. So
we've been creating a series that are specifically tailored towards clinicians and how to work with different first responder professions. And it seems like, we keep hearing that sometimes you take all the stuff you learned in school and kind of throw some of that out the window in order to start to really be able to be an effective clinician with that first responder population. So with that in mind, is there a common thread that you find with the first responder professions?
Yes, I think there's just an inherent drive for service, putting others before self, and with that comes a toughness and a stick-to-itiveness that these individuals have, which I think is inspiring. And there's almost a tacit understanding that it's going to be a stoic culture. It's going to be individuals who seem impervious to all the things around them. And that's, and in some ways that's wonderful and good. And in some ways it's not, because it's passed down to each generation that, comes up in training. And so that can be a bit of a gag order on people who, who feel like can't talk about these things. But by and large, I think that it's really inspirational to see people who are inputting so much, trauma and tragedy and transgression, and managing to put it somewhere, whether they know what they are or not, and just keep driving on, which makes, as I mentioned before, in a therapeutic environment, regardless of what that is, they dig in just as much there as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm always surprised when they're surprised that when we get into the meat of something that they could be hurt, or sad, and there may be some tears, they're really shocked. They're kind of surprised. And I said, and what I usually say to them is, it all goes in. You just might not be aware of it, but it's in there, And I
think we all assume there's a hole in our bucket. So that's just going to eventually go
no, there's no hole in the bucket. The bucket must be dumped.
That's right. Yeah. And either we can do it proactively, or something or someone else will do it. And that's really where people get bowled over. And I think very self-conscious when they're caught off guard, their cup runneth over, or there's a tipping point moment. And people would often ask me, why is this happening to me now? They get very caught up, and why now? It's been 17 years.
Right.
This is not my first rodeo. I've had, tons of these pediatric death calls or whatever. Right. And my initial answer is, it doesn't matter why it's happening now. It is. And I don't think that's a bad thing. It may be that your psyche and your, mind, body, heart, and soul have kind of gotten together in a committee and said, hey, I think this person is able to handle this. This is now when they have to defrag the computer. They need to space because we know to keep going. So
I sometimes describe it as the closet, or the closet is getting full, and the door is starting to bow like this, and stuff is starting to come out. And why this one was the straw that broke the camel's back, I don't know. And we don't have to spend too much time belaboring the point, but I'm glad you're here.
Yeah.
That's what I end up saying.
most people just want to fortify the barrier. They want to put more.
Oh, yeah.
The edge,
Put some plywood over that door.
Yeah, plywood. How about alcohol? Right?
Absolutely. It's going to, and I understand that people do in an effort not to explode, they implode potentially. But that can, the more pressure you put behind it and the more you put into the closet, the bigger the release.
Yeah.
Because I don't care how much you love this job, at some point you're not doing this job forever.
If our families are so important to us, why is the divorce rate so high?
You have to stay vigilant. You have to stay aware. The problem is when you get home or when you're out in public, you run the risk of not being able to turn that off.
Tracy, describe the way that you therapeutically work with first responders and their families.
I try to meet, first and foremost, people where they are. And that means literally sometimes and figure
okay.
If it's out in the field or we need to go out and, do exposure therapy or recreate something. If they want to be in the four walls of a therapy room, that's fine. If they're more comfortable walking or sitting by a bench up by the water, whatever that needs to be. And the same with family members. Now, as in some of the work that I do now, I ask people I don't have an office. I have a presence at different agencies. So I ask people where they want to meet. That feels most comfortable for them, so that if they do get emotional or maybe they want a little bit more noise around them, so that it's not so much pressure. And then I really enjoy engaging in non-traditional interventions or non-traditional therapeutic interventions. And that's not to say that they're not founded in clinical acumen. For example, engaging in equine-assisted therapy, so working with horses and doing groundwork, because horses are a wonderful mirror for human emotion. Engagement is really powerful. The horse culture is very similar to first responder military culture. In some cases, we've done scuba-assisted breathing retraining for people who are having anxiety and panic when they're very easily triggered. And just whatever it takes, if it means I garnered some military resources once and had them spin up a very expensive aircraft to get somebody to be able to sit on it and have all the sounds and smells. And, we sat there with radio headsets. We told we got on a different channel than the pilots. We never left the ground. We didn't need to. But it was I don't think the result of that could have happened in the therapy room. So I really like pushing the limits appropriately, of course, but really finding out what's going to be most impactful. And a lot of times it's not verbal, but it's visceral.
Sure.
There's that muscle memory for underwater breathing and so forth.
Can you expand on more about your working with different agencies, so almost like an embedded clinician, but also on call 24/7. Can you talk a little bit more about that and how you interact with first responders and perhaps in a critical incident, what you do there to show up and to deliver help?
Absolutely. So it was very important to me coming out of a community and a population where trust was paramount, obviously in a therapeutic setting. I think it's even more so, particularly in law enforcement and fire rescue as well, communications that people have to believe that you are there for them and that you're not the narc. So the arrangement that I've made with a couple of agencies I work with was that I'll be embedded as much as possible. So I do ride-alongs, sit-besides, work-alongs, teach, send out monthly emails, whatever it is, just to have a presence. And that's really just for the old traditional FaceTime, not this FaceTime. And the idea is that I am directly for the employee.
Right.
Not to say that I'm not for the employer, not to say that I'm working underneath the auspices of the agency, but I have no reportability, which is, I think, really essential. So I can never be associated with any kind of fitness for duty. Even if they ask me, what do you think about this person? I have to really steer clear of that because my name can never be in the same space and time as that.
Yeah.
And it may be that if somebody has worked with me and has spoken with me offline and they have to go for a fitness for duty, if they want me to, connect and advocate for them, that's fine. But I'm always going to be in that advocacy role.
Sure.
Because if they think I work for the agency, directly and not via them, to making sure that the agency has a fit and ready and healthy force, then it's just not going to work. So it's wonderful for me because I learn tremendously by watching people do the work they do, by being able to get staff notifications and daily briefs and really seeing trends and that type of thing. So when there's a critical incident, we just had one this morning that involved a juvenile fatality. And when things like that happen, we have a peer support team, developing a CISM team. So I'm an advisor for those teams, and we make sure that they deploy. There's a communication method that they use. One agency uses that is locked down. And so they basically are always surveilling and making sure that if there's one of those critical incidents that they are available. I'll arrive on scene if need be. Typically I'll get called out. It doesn't happen that often. Usually I respond days later. I'll make some phone calls and kind of ease into it because I know they're getting inundated with a lot of potential legal and other issues that they have to deal with. So it's been, I think because I am, in the beginning, it was very off-putting and I think anxiety provoking and suspicion building, trust questioning when I was there, particularly for patrol. So I was just genuinely and innocently trying to go on a ride along to learn more about the job. But it was met with this instant fear of why are you here? Who sent you? So I don't deploy on behalf of any supervisor or anyone. Me, for example, and says, hey, I'd really like for you to talk with one of my guys or gals. I'll say, I'm happy to, but what I need you to do is either ask them to call me or ask them if it's okay for you to give them, give their number to me and I will reach out. And then that's where we stop communicating. And every once in a while I'll get a, hey, how's my guy doing? And it's innocent.
Right.
Based on the person that it's coming from a good place.
Yes.
But I just respectfully decline. I say that, that's not how this works. And because that person will want the same. So I think that's a really valuable model to use. And I think we're kind of going in that direction a little bit more. It does mean that an agency has to have many different assets. So they have a new hire psychologist and a fitness for duty psychologist and an embedded psychologist. But it's to do anything else, I think, it just looks good on paper. So it's the agency wanting to look good, but not necessarily be good if they realize that they're, if they don't understand the delicateness of that relationship.
Right. So, Tracy, what are some of the behaviors that frustrate first responders?
Oh, I have a laundry list. It can be, I can go down the list right now if you'd like.
Go right ahead. Pull your list out.
So I'll give you the short version of the list.
All right.
Okay. So this is behaviors and attitudes of other people. So ignorance, laziness, incompetence, naivete, a cavalier attitude, politicking, not taking control, decreased situational awareness, kind of being oblivious, shirking responsibility, excuse making, freezing, indecisiveness, lack of contingency planning, not trusting or being trustworthy, breaking rules, rogue behavior, improper training, delivering improper training, wrong decisions, loss of focus, micromanaging, and not being intense or urgent enough.
So most of those have to do with the safety of the first responder. It's like someone else is going to mess up and someone's going to get hurt. Not, could be themselves, but it also could be someone else on that shift.
Yes. And whether it's intentional or unintentional, I mean, there's a different response to that. If somebody just doesn't know better, there's, I think, a little bit more
not experienced or maybe they have attentional problems.
Yes. Yeah. So I think I do see a lot of grace and forgiveness in the community for other people. They just don't know what they don't know. But it can be very frustrating because it puts more pressure and more work on the first responder. So if it means they need to be more vigilant because their family is not vigilant, or they just have this heightened sense of fear of something happening to their family, whether they're there or not. So there's this, so what looks like, what is really protection, talking to kids or a spouse about how to, to be careful and be safe, it can feel very controlling.
Sure.
And so I think a lot of behaviors are well-intended, but are misinterpreted by the family member because it comes with a certain degree of,
Right. Well, the first responder has seen the worst of the worst, right? And so they've seen the little kid who fell off the bike not wearing a helmet, and then he was hit by a car or something like that. And so that's all they can imagine with their own young children at home. And so, of course, they're going to say to the spouse, you got to make sure that Junior wears his helmet. You got to make sure that Junior doesn't go on this road. And then it does seem over the top, but it's mainly because they've been traumatized. They're still carrying that trauma.
Absolutely. And I think that creates a dynamic where things that are possible become probable in the mind of a first responder, or better to err on the side of caution, or better to assume that this is going to happen, so I can reverse engineer it to keep it.
Yeah, right.
Calling all mental health professionals, join us for the Clinician Masterclass series, Working with First Responders, and empower your practice with expert insights and actionable strategies, brought to you by the Responder Resilience Podcast. This isn't your typical podcast. Dive deep with seasoned therapists who will share specific knowledge and tools to support firefighters, police, EMS, veterans, and 911 personnel. Mark your calendar to save the dates and get ready to transform your practice. July 17th, treating EMS and 911. July 24th, treating law enforcement. August 7th, treating first responder veterans. And August 21st, treating firefighters. Subscribe and stream anytime after the premiere on our channels, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. Stay in the loop and sign up now at respondertv.com. Because this has come up a few times also. First responders, in addition to these qualities that frustrate them and other people, they tend to be super hard on themselves. Particularly after a call that didn't go the way they wanted to. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in first responders' self-talk, negative self-beliefs, and are there ways for them to overcome that?
Absolutely. So there is a tendency, as you said, to be rather unforgiving, dichotomous. It's either a success or not success, even though we know that when things aren't successful or we don't succeed, we learn tremendously from that. So there is always that silver lining if we learn from it. But I do find that there is and I think it's both the professional and the personal aspect of a person, that it's a very high bar. They want to succeed all during their training. They're driven to success. They see very quickly what failure, or lack of success can mean for themselves, for their brothers and sisters, for the community. So there is the high bar is good, and a good work ethic is fantastic. If we all know, if more people had a strong work ethic, everything would be better, right? So I think that turns into a self-condemnation. And I keenly listen, as I'm sure you both do too, that when people say should, the joke is don't should on yourself.
Yeah.
And because we don't do that to other people. And I will point out that discrepancy and a kind of hypocrisy of the double standard. But when people are at the should level, it really speaks, I think, to their heart and soul, that they're human, is kind of hammering their professional because, and maybe it's a way to just reinforce that I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to do that again. But should comes with guilt, shame, and regret. And so those emotions are actually distractors. Those are not motivators or helpers. So I try to get people to shift from I should have or I shouldn't have to I could have or I couldn't have, because that's always true. That's a truism that we could always do something different with the outcome ahead of time and hindsight bias, all those things. And one more step down from that I think is important is because it goes to a different part of the body and psyche, is to say, I wish I had been able to.
I wish I had been able to, yeah.
And that's kind of a longing and a yearning for a different outcome. But it's from a more tender-hearted, compassionate, neutral space than a demanding one. So and it's not, we don't like longing and yearning for things because that's a loss that, indicates a loss as well. But it lets us know or be able to tell ourselves that if we assume we're doing the best we can with what we have at the time, then the only really logical explanation or end game is to say, I wish I had been able to do something different. Now, that's not to say that there's not a learning point there, but to err is human. No one is perfect. It's just that can be, that imperfectness is terrifying to people, I think, to think that they would not be able to be everything to everyone all the time. And that's just a standard that's so unforgiving.
And I think a lot of that starts in childhood, right? You're familiar with the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, where first responders score higher than on average than civilians. And I think that idea of it should be different here. Someone needs to step up, and then they end up either, taking the brunt of the problem, whether it's, alcoholic parents or, being left to their own devices because parents have to work or whatever. There's fighting in the house, mom's being smacked around, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's a one-parent household. And I think for a lot of first responders, it really, they were alone, kind of overwhelmed, and took the brunt of responsibility. They grew up in a hurry, and now they happen to be very resourceful people. They gravitate toward being a first responder. And then when something doesn't go well, if someone dies, whether it had nothing to do with them getting there on time, there's nothing that they could have done differently, they still, I think there's that anger of, this shouldn't have happened. And, and then they'll put it on themselves, maybe because as a kid, they put it on themselves. The adult didn't put it on them, but just by default. And I think that's where that self-blame and holding themselves to a higher standard, but I'm a paramedic, but I'm a firefighter. I'm a police officer. This shouldn't have happened. This outcome. So I think a lot of it comes from adverse childhood experiences, and what they've done in their head.
I agree wholeheartedly. They're, as you said, they take the brunt of the responsibility, but they also are expected, or not expected, but just do take the reins. And so in a chaotic environment or predictable environment, they're trying to lock down all the variables and get more control aspects in there. And it makes sense. And it's really a great defense mechanism. It's a great behavior against, to guard against, negative outcomes. And so, it certainly does shift into that. I'm glad that you mentioned the inner child, so people kind of realize and think that's real shrinky to say, but there's an exposure grid. I think I've shared with you both that, and part of that grid that shows the complexity of trauma exposure, you can see it there, is that the professional is responding. So with all their training and their experience and wisdom and tools and everything, that they are responding as a professional. And that's where you get a lot of the self-deprecating thoughts, the negative thinking. And then in addition to the professional, and we're looking at the kind of the blue grid here, the adult human, the personal, the personhood, the humanhood is responding. And that can mean they're responding as a father, as a mother, as sister, brother, or anybody who has also experienced trauma. And that includes that historical self. And I let people know that when everything that we see, that we perceive and interpret in our mind, is perceived through a set of filters. And those filters can be both good and bad. And certainly the ACEs are there, and they're kind of skewing the way that we interpret something. So you have three entities showing up to every call. And the reason I teach this a lot is because there's a tendency to, not so much for leadership sometimes, to not ask people if they're okay, but to tell them when they're okay. Like, you're good, as they're walking by. And I think that's a need for everybody to be okay. So I'm just going to tell everybody they're okay. But 95% of the time, I think that the professional, when they say, I'm fine, I'm good, they really do mean it. And they're also, because they're worried that they're going to have, they're going to be disarmed or they're going to be put on light duty, because they don't want that persona to fall from grace.
Mm-hmm.
So when they're saying they're fine, their professional is fine, unless or until they start Monday morning quarterbacking, second guessing, ruminating, anxious about an outcome.
Yeah.
Sometimes the professional is fine, but the human is not okay. And the human is okay, but the human is still kind of protecting the child that experienced this. So if a first responder were to go to a domestic violence call and they had been exposed to that, as you mentioned, as part of an adverse childhood experience, they are going to, and really should, by all accounts, respond differently. And the outcome of that call makes a difference in how impactful they can be. So that first responder might take an extra minute to get down and kneel down and have some face time and eye-to-eye contact with a child who is terrified because either they remember a law enforcement or fire rescue personnel doing that for them.
Yeah.
They remember being terrified and confused.
Mm-hmm.
There being a lot of commotion and adults and intensity in the room. And so they either want to compensate for that to make sure and not pay it forward in a bad way. They want to protect people.
Right. Ironically, they're like the best person and the worst person, depending on how much insight that they have. Right.
Yes.
So
yes.
They are the best person to get down on the knee and say, it's okay, buddy. Mom and dad, we're going to help mom and dad work it out and you're safe now. And, or if they're not in touch with how this has triggered them, they flip out and they're yelling at mom or dad.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So we have to, it's important that everyone has self-awareness and insight, because you can be self-aware, but not take it to the next step, not realize, how it impacts your behavior. You just know that you have a lot of, where you are very reactive to abusers, but that you don't really necessarily put it all together. And so it doesn't turn into the right reaction. But so I think that idea that even when we're looking at mental health programs among first responder communities is realizing that there are three entities that show up to the call. So peer support should be thinking about that. They should be thinking about their own historical self and how they relate to people. And in addition, if I may, I'll kind of go through the rest of that grid.
Yeah, please do.
Please.
Yeah, I'm just trying to imagine how the other ones play in. So if you can give us some examples, that would be great.
Certainly. So on the other side, on the mustard color looking side of the grid, you see this as witness, recipient, and participant. So there is a tremendous amount of witnessing of trauma among first responders. And I think the witnessing is sometimes given less attention because it just is what it is. And whether you're a dispatcher and you're listening and, creating this picture, but you're witnessing an event happen, or you're on scene or you're part of it. I think it just gets ignored a little bit. And it's very important because whether it's passive or actively witnessing. So showing up too late to a call to be effective, not that he showed up too late, but just the nature of the incident was such that that you are really in a very heavy witness modality, which is very difficult for people who are active responders. So in addition to witnessing, you can be an unsolicited or solicited recipient, an officer involved shooting or a stabbing, or someone becoming violent. And then naturally participating. So I have a list of a variety of that just fills this entire grid, a list of examples for each of those that kind of fit in each pocket. So you have three people responding, three entities of the self-responding. You have three different roles that they can be responding.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes multiple. And then there's these categories up top of just this is just kind of how I minimize it into threat, transgression, and tragedy calls. So threat having anything to do with mortality, transgression having to do with moral injury when other people or ourselves, when we break the code with right and wrong. And obviously a lot of first responding occurs because there's been transgression. And then tragedy, especially witnessing and bearing the emotional brunt and of a very intense emotionality of others. And I consider that more to be a soul burden. type
burden,
of injury. So you have over it with threat, it's kind of more of the post-traumatic stress, that fear and anxiety, anticipatory anxiety response, as opposed to the moral injury and soul burden. And then down below, I just put some different themes. So an injustice of there's been a breaking of the social contract. That's something that didn't need to happened. Something that's inhumane or something that's unnecessary. And there are a lot of other themes that go along with that. And then, of course, the emotionality that results: disgust, disbelief, confusion, disappointment, regret, and those types of things. So I sometimes will ask a group of first responders to give me an example of a critical incident that they exposed to, and then they have to put a tick mark in each of the boxes to see how complex that is. And then you know that's just one call of one shift, of a career. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that, in the totality of the experience and the exposure, one box can have, say, the witnessing box to tragedy can be very full of just scores and scores of tick marks.
Sure.
It might be the participating, box where there's just one tick mark. And maybe it's one but not another. It has, to do with their performance. Did I do enough? The second guessing. So it creates a complexity that is, I think, very mind-boggling for some, and why I think it's why sometimes first responders don't want to open up the Pandora's box, because it's overwhelming and emotionally confusing and so much to sort through. So I use this as kind of a tool for clinicians and also a tool for first responders to think about what are the themes and what are the, the overarching emotional components to these things, rather than, just the call. And in some cases, the call itself needs to be worked through EMDR or through other therapies that through step by step. Oftentimes I find that if you've been on the job for more than, a minute, that there are critical incidents and accumulated, exposure altogether. So it's very layered, and there's an overlapping, Venn diagram that would surprise a lot of people. And it is what it is, which is what a lot of people say. It is what it is. And yes, it is. And yes, it needs to be paid attention to.
Absolutely. This really outlines the complexity, like you said, and it's more than I think like command staff is going to think about, and so introducing them to it, the peer support team, clinicians that work with first responders, and then maybe even the first responders themselves when they're in training, to give them some of these ideas.
At the core of every community beats the heart of the first responders, ever present on the front line, making the impossible look routine. Through the relentless pressure and the unseen scars, our frontline warriors silently battle the stress of the job. It's crucial they armor up mentally and emotionally, not just for the community they safeguard, but for the families they return to. Supporting the wellness and mental health of first responders is priority number one. By championing their well-being, we're ensuring they're unstoppable, both in the line of duty and in life. Step up for the Titans who protect us. Because when they're firing on all cylinders, they're not just first responders, they're game changers. Join us. Visit ResponderTV.com to be the difference.
As you approach police and fire departments, what are your thoughts on building a successful mental health program?
Great question. I think you have to find a behavioral health specialist who's going to be at least initially a consultant and kind of bringing in all the pieces together. And someone who's experienced enough, but also has working knowledge and cultural competency in the line of work that they're engaging in. So I think that person can advise the teams. I think they can certainly be on call and be available for people. There has to be a tremendous amount of socializing of that person.
Yeah.
Have to be willing to, as you said before, David, earlier, there's, grad school and our training teaches us so much, and then the rest is on the job training. And so much of it is relationship building with the employees of that agency, because that's really what it comes down to. They're in such an intimate human element when they're working. And so I think the way to help people heal is to be able to have genuine, authentic connections with other people so that they can feel comfortable enough and let their guard down enough and put their pride and ego and concern away to be able to open up. So trust is paramount. I think having a lot of different options is really important too. It's not one size fits all. Some people will never come and talk to the psychologist, no matter how easygoing, cool, and irreverent and dark humor and colorful language and everything. So providing online resources and making them very, very available. So putting window clings in the bathroom, or something in the bathroom stalls, or QR codes, and not inundating them, but instead, really kind of cherry picking the best options. Having peer support socialize those things as well is great. So letting them know, hey, have you looked at this app, or have you tried this? Because anything that comes from the ground up is going to be organically and from the troop level and rank and file up is going to be most successful. If it comes from me, if it comes from the higher ups, as a CYA, or it's going to be seen as there's some ulterior motive to it, or that maybe they're tracking us, or their RP address. If we had anyone had enough time for that. So I think that a robust program has elements of bringing in mental health and peer support and the chaplaincy, resources that are tangible and valuable to people. One of the agencies, we're starting a lending library. So we have 50 books at 2 different locations where they can just take them out and on the honor system. We'll assume that if someone holds on to a book, they either forgot, and we'll send out a reminder email, hey, if anyone has a book they forgot about, or they're holding on that book for a reason, and that's the whole point. We send a book list out so people get curious about those things, not just about the work, but different things, post-traumatic growth and different angles of health.
Absolutely. How it impacts the family. Maybe there should be a book.
Yes. Lots of resources, and there aren't enough. We need more of those. The other thing I would mention is that getting family members involved and infused into that wellness program is so valuable and very difficult, because typically agencies and departments don't have access to the emails and the contact information. So really the first responder is the gatekeeper for that information. As you can imagine, if we're having a family webinar and Tracy's going to be, giving some insights, they think I'm giving a psychological crowbar, so that when they come home, they're going to get ambushed and asked a million questions. And instead, what we do is we talk about what things would look like. So if your loved one comes home and there's a gravity to them, there's a way to ask questions other than the how is your shift, because you're just going to get fine, good. But instead, helping them understand that their loved one, and helping the first responder understand that they can speak of their day without speaking about it. To walk in and say, how was your day? And think about that grid and say, it was pretty heavy with tragedy, or there was a notable tragedy. And so I can't be around levity and joy and fun right now. I can't make that flip. So I need a few minutes to decompress and recalibrate and kind of sort through these things, because my heart is heavy. And if I feel like if I just jump right in with the kids, I'm probably going to get angry. Anger is a cover for sadness. I know that, but just have those basic conversations can go such a long way in terms of understanding and intimacy, emotional intimacy. So many things.
Well, it's like a win-win in the Venus and Mars realm, where the first responder can, express themselves in a way that their spouse can understand in their own terms. And so, wow, that's incredible.
And a shorthand, just coming up with a shorthand of like, hey, at an 8 out of 10 scale, where are you? And if someone says I'm an 8,
right.
No matter what the emotion is, it's just that it's an intense emotion. And if it's anything other than joy and happiness, that, then they know, okay, so I know what's going on. But also for the first responder, say, where are you at in the 10 scale?
Yeah.
So that there's a take. And how are the kids? How have they been?
Right. Did you have a day from hell with the kids? Was someone home vomiting and diarrhea all day? And
because at that point, no one wants the kids, right? Like the loved one wants to say, "Here are the kids," right?
Here are the kids,
like,
right?
Here they are back,
Right.
Everyone else's kids.
Right. So it's also like you're encouraging an awareness for the spouse and the first responder to look at, okay, who's coming home and what is front and center. So
like
for the first responder, which version of me, am I walking through the door with right now? And how do I communicate that to my spouse without pushing them aside or overwhelming them in some way? I think that's really important.
Yeah, and you don't have to talk about the important thing is because first responders will say, well, I don't want to pass on the graphic, horrific,
and they shouldn't.
Story. I don't want to put it in their mind. But they don't have to do that. They can just say, hey, some things happened today, and I find myself being really impatient with certain things, like that list of things that frustrate first responders. And I feel like if the kid, I don't want to get angry with the kids. I want to enjoy them. And and you just told me that they've been kind of bratty today.
Yeah.
And I know that, and I just was at a pediatric fatality and I saw, or whatever. And so I can't maneuver that really well right now. So I want to be here and I want to be present with the kids, but I'm probably quiet. I don't have to, like none of the story was told about the nature of the car accident or because the perspective, if these are the goalposts, and the perspective broadens obviously with the exposure to things that happen. I think the emotionality does the opposite. I think that the range of emotionality in the first
so
it's very like flip switch, and the world wants the dimmer switch version of that, and it's just so much pressure. But with just a little bit of communication, a little bit of shorthand, an understanding of between the two, it can turn the whole day around or night around.
And then there are the spouses that are plugged into social media too, and so they they may have heard, but it may be the rumor mill that they've heard, and they want to they kind of want to know, they don't want to know the gruesome details, and so that has to be worked out too.
Right.
And did you hurt? They said an officer was hurt. Who was it? That type of thing. But then that's going to bring it all back front and center for the first responder, so they have to figure out, all right, when and where are we going to talk about this?
Yes.
Because the kids want dad or mom to go and play right now.
Yes. And so sometimes as loved ones, we're asking a question, we don't realize what we're asking. We don't realize that something that could cause that person, our loved one, to kind of, I say break open. People say break down.
Yes. Yeah.
I just call it break open. And that it's like, nesting dolls. So we sometimes ask questions that are very loaded questions, but we don't know it. So we can get, some very negative feedback. And it was truly an innocent question, but being able to finesse the question and talk about this on a good day, right? And a day off, like, hey, so let's figure out this reuniting that we have after every shift. Let's figure out how we can do this a little bit more efficiently, effectively, and, with good understanding.
Yeah, because it really is part of every shift. It's, particularly the back end of it. It's that re-entry into the real world, so to speak, and interfacing with your spouse and your family. And I have to say, I'll go out on a limb and say most of us don't really have the skills to do that in a smooth way.
Yeah, and it's something that should be taught at the academy level, at the introduction, the training level, is that if we know statistically we have to be paying attention to mental health because that's that's outpacing the line of duty death, then if we're putting so much training and gear and effort and repetitions into doing the job, we should be infusing that mental health piece as well. And that creates the cultural shift over the years that we talk about it here and we work it out here, and we regard it and honor the fact that this is heavy and that it is part of our humanity. And if we pay attention to it, we will be even better over here. There's emotional bandwidth and, and greater buffer. And we're also going to be fantastic at home, because who doesn't want to be the best parent they can be?
Right.
I think the first responders can get into this downward spiral that work is very difficult and trying and fulfilling. And, and it's wonderful to feel vital and effective and be the agent of things, of change and impact. But then that means that I'm on fumes and I'm just gassed out at home. So I can't be the So I want to be at home. So I'll just become a workaholic because work, although it's damaging me every day, my psyche, heart, and creating this soul burden. It's the one place that I feel capable and competent and in control.
Sure.
Right? At home, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just messing it up. So we can arrest that cycle. We can teach people to be more, have more equity and have the way that they, the two parts of the self. Then I think we're going to have healthier people and that affects retention and affects performance. It affects relationships. So the shift or the unit, is healthier. It just,
Yeah, and it serves the first responder and their family into the retirement chapter as well.
Yes.
Sets them up for success that way.
Yes. So there's a real healthy family, waiting to receive that person and say, okay, now let's get let's go travel the world, or let's go raise the grandkids or whatnot.
Sure.
And that person is healthier because mental health obviously.
Right. All right.
Let's shift lanes and talk about retreats. You do so many things, Tracy, and amongst them are summits. You are out there speaking, and you've got I guess 4 times a year you do a retreat. Can you tell us a little bit about how often, where, and how you do it?
Yes, we have. So First Responder Project is my nonprofit, and we are focused on, as you said, educational summits and trainings in our retreats. So our retreats happen at least 4 times a year, but we have been adding in the other months, we've been adding in peer support training retreats. So we're running retreats for peer support specialists, where we're talking about advanced topics and special topics in mental health, personality disorders, and attachment style and things like that will help peer supporters help their folks. But they also get the retreat aspect. So they do self-awareness and insight exercises. So we're bringing both those things together, and it's just the teams that are coming in. We typically bring in teams from different agencies and departments, so we have some cross-pollination of lines of service and different agencies. So the other retreat, our flagship retreat, is unique in that we provide it for the first responder and a primary support person. And that doesn't have to be a spouse, but it can be. And oftentimes it's a spouse or a romantic partner. Sometimes it's a parent, if it's, say, a young person. They might be their parent, and maybe that parent has also been a first responder, so it's kind of dual designated. And we give the family member is not an add-on. They're not a plus one. They are showing up to that retreat and getting the full meal deal, just as the first responder is. So we spend a lot of time together as a group. We have no more than 30 people, but typically it's more like 24 people, so that when we break into separate groups, it's a smaller group. So they spend a lot of time together getting psychoeducation, doing some experiential exercises and team building to build camaraderie and fellowship, because of course building that builds sharing and emotionality. And then we separate them 3 different times during the retreat, so they work on the same project but they do it separately. And they also have, inherently have fellowship with, their own tribe. So, and it's really interesting because support people really don't get that a whole lot. Their support network is typically not their department or their agency, because they're kind of all in it together. So there's not an opportunity or like a willingness or capacity to talk about the things because everyone's going through it. So we bring strangers together, strangers who, are in the same boat, and they just really open up with each other. We also find that the support people will say, I'm learning a lot about my person through listening to other people. So it's putting it all into perspective now. I'm starting to know why he or she behaves this way or feels this way, and vice versa. So we have a lot of first responders say, wow, I hadn't even thought about that. You're home wondering, waiting, and worrying 75% of the time, that it doesn't just glaze over. You just know I'll be home. You're thinking about this all the time. So we have this, this osmotic, thing, which is great. And we, of course, we have some therapeutic exercises like mask making and some things that are very, very profound that always surprise people a little bit. Right. Kind of goofy, like, oh, arts and crafts. And then, an hour later, like, this is the most
totally into it. Right. Yeah.
But we give them time to kayak or fish, or, we're in this beautiful environment, camp that is, and we have a bonfire at night and we break bread together. So there's such there's a natural reluctance on day one. But by the second or third meal, by the first bonfire,
best buddies.
We ended up saying two things. How long have we been here? Like, we just get here this morning, which is always good. And that at the end, the feedback that we get is, you should really add another day. And I say,
really add it.
No, if I added another day, no one would come, because who has the time, right? Yeah. But it's a great compliment to the organization.
Sure. So where do you sleep? Do you sleep in tents, or do you have like
there's hotel rooms? It's on a camp, a conference.
It's on a camp. All right.
So they have primitive at the other end. They have primitive campsites and housing that's like open berthing. But we put people in their own rooms that have their own beds. So we put each dyad, each coupling in their own room. And it's right behind the bonfire space. So it's, it's very relaxing and peaceful, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of, it's providing a lot of education. It's giving them a lot of opportunity to talk to one another, to talk, around. And, we know when to step back. And that's the best thing for us is, infuse some information and some ideas and questions. And activities, and then let them, work.
Stir the pot and then sit back and watch.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. So it's been really a wonderful experience, and for me as a clinician to be able to see so much growth and healing, and you see people gain bandwidth and gain buffer. Of all the things that they have. So we know we're sending people back to work and back into their environments, feeling some relief and that recalibration and relaxation. We're going to be partnering up. There's a statewide grant in Florida, and we're working to partner up with some organizations to also do follow-up. So we do a pre-post assessment when they come in, and we're hoping to invite those organizations in, and so they'll be reaching out to people afterward, just checking in with them, just saying, how are you doing? It's all, of course, all voluntary, but it gives us a chance to kind of just know that, hey, we're not just, this isn't a one and done type of retreat. We also have a lot of people, probably at least half the people who attend spontaneously ask us without us soliciting it, if they can come back and be a part of it and come back. Volunteer. And that's wonderful, because there's a large peer support component that we utilize, and it's clinically informed, but very peer supported. And we love that because, and we've had people say, when I came back and went through it as a peer or logistics person or whatnot, but they're listening. They get something completely different out of it, because they know what they know it. They're not, everything's not on the fly. It's all, they know what's happening. And so they can hear it and experience it from a different perspective.
Sounds amazing. And, I'm thrilled to say that I've signed up for one in October. So
we are looking forward to seeing you. Can't wait.
Yeah. And, just
awesome.
to touch on it, we probably don't have time to get too deep into it now, but I just wanted to acknowledge the piece you mentioned about the mask making. I was in a training where you demonstrated some of the masks and told the stories behind the masks, and wow, was that powerful to hear how transformative it was to the people. As you described, they went through the process of making the mask. So you've got a lot of powerful tools and experiences built into that retreat, and I am really looking forward to October.
It's going to be great to have you there. It is a very, every retreat, it's the same type of format, but we go by the compass and not the clock. So I kind of laugh at it. I have this agenda for the day. We have plans for the day, but it's so fluid, because if a conversation is happening and it's good, especially after people are sharing their masks with their own group, we will go as long as we need to for that, and we time it right so that we have some buffer. But it is remarkable to see, not surprising, because I know creative arts expression is it taps into a different part of our brain, and so it's so difficult to put words to some of the things.
It's a nonverbal.
Yes, and so you get them thinking about it, and it becomes very symbolic, and there's so much depth, symbolism. And so it's one thing to make the mask, but then to be able to share it with each other after they've bonded, for a couple of days. It's so powerful, and it always gives me goosebumps, because I think, God, this is the type of thing that needs to be happening. That in order for people who work in an environment where, in such an austere and atypical, exposure, you really need to bring atypical type of, therapeutic interventions for them to experience. For one, they have like it. It's interesting and curious and something new, different. But it just doesn't, it's almost therapeutic incidentally. Everything is the communicate, the meals they have and the team building exercises. So it's such a pleasure. I love, engaging in therapy and having one-on-one conversations or running a group. But this is just something that's just really impactful on a different level. And it's so enjoyable to see, people shift in such a short period of time.
Right. It sounds like you're kind of tapping into a person's core self, right? And they have to be a little bit vulnerable to do that, but you're not asking them to wear their heart on their sleeve and tell about that gruesome call and how much did you hurt over it and did you go home and cry? No, this is a completely different avenue to really have them get in touch with their core self.
Yes. And a lot of times people say, even the people who are relatively quiet, because we won't make anyone talk. Thing, but inevitably people you typically do because they want to bond, that innate sense for, need for human connection. And some of the quietest people have told us afterward that it was the most impactful. Like they are the ones that it had the most impact on because they're just in receive mode. They're just absorbing it all. And they oftentimes want to come back because they now want to be on the peer side.
Oh, I see.
So they can, like bring those people together or maybe pull out the ones that are a little bit more reluctant. So for us, it's like paying it forward. We're building this community of alumni.
Nice.
And we want this model. I would just love this model to be everywhere. And there are lots of retreats out there happening in different places and in different ways. So I love to go visit them and have people come out and see ours and just share wealth and share our toys and get people to be. And then, of course, the fundraising that needs to go into that. That's the challenge of profit is I'm not a businesswoman. I'm never going to be in that true, traditional sense. I love being in the trenches and doing the work. But it's such a, to me, I'm very biased, of course, as we all are, but it's such a valuable way for the community to take care of those who serve them.
Yes.
In such a way. So we always have to be doing that as well. But we have such wonderful people who volunteer. Of course, first responders are volunteering. Shocker, that they want to help each other out. But it's just a beautiful thing to see. It's just humanity at its best.
Wow. Well, please share with us where people can find you, your website, any social media channels, just the best ways to find out more about what you do.
Yes, we're building our social media up. But all of our volunteers, including myself, are not really avid social media people. So the best way to reach us is through our website, and that's firstresponderproject.org.
Okay.
On there on Monday, we'll have our link up to register for our summit. Our summit is going to be September 19th, all day at the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. And the link to sign up for that will go live on Monday, September 19th. And that summit's going to be unique this year in that it's going to be workshop based. So it's going to be a little akin to the types of things we do at the retreat in that we're going to have conversations and facilitated discussions and workshops in every room that people can choose which one they want to go to. And that's really there's going to be an expectation of, okay, but we need to put your heart needs to be on your sleeve a little bit. And even if you want to go into that room and just listen, we want to have conversations that are meaningful and purposeful and beneficial. So it's going to be a different one, a different style, but this is our 5th year. And I think that's what people really are looking forward to, is to getting that kind of education that's experiential. And to share, meeting of the minds. So that is on there. And then the application for the retreats is on there. It's a quick application, just really demographic information, just checking on, what people's needs might be while they're there. That comes directly to me. And then I reach out to individuals and just, and then start communicating and make sure they have their support person. And if they don't have a support person, we tell them to bring a battle buddy, but bring somebody, a coworker. And you'll just stay with that person. You'll just stay over in the, in the group of first responders. But we want them to experience it and have somebody to be able to bounce the, ideas and notions off of later, which is important. So, but yeah, everything at firstresponderproject.org. And then we'll be building up our social media presence as we go and get people who are really good at that. To help us out.
But you need somebody. There's like a techie, right?
Yes,
you got to find a techie. They'll set you up in a half an hour. So.
I'm so old school. I have boards in my office that just have Post-it notes all over them.
Tactile. Well, Tracy, such a great conversation. We just we covered a lot of great stuff, and I know there's more to come. Thank you so much for sharing this time with us and everything that you've been up to, and especially these amazing projects you're doing to help kind of get first responders rejuvenated and kind of restored from doing the job. We really appreciate all the fine work you're doing out there, and for being with us talking about it.
Thanks to you both for having me on and asking great questions and being so invested in the populations that we all serve.
Thanks, Tracy. I enjoy your passion.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful professional life. So it's been time with wonderful humans. So
absolutely.
Happier.
Remember to like and subscribe YouTube, Responder Resilience, Facebook, Responder Wellness Inc., Responder TV, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and go to our website, respondertv.com, for past episodes and guest information. Till the next time, stay safe, be kind to yourself, take care.